Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Why don't you come up sometime, see me?
Rated bar! Top of the world!
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Hey everybody, Kirk here. I just want to say before we start the episode, make sure you follow us on Twitter.
And Facebook.
And if you enjoy the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and a comment on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We love to hear your feedback, and you can find us on any social media by searching Silver Screen Time Machine.
We appreciate your feedback. Look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, and welcome again to Silver Screen Time Machine. Well, actually, we're still in Silver Scream Time Machine because we're still in our spooky season and our horror films, although this film is not as much of a horror film, but we're at Silver Scream Time Machine, Wendy and Kirk's classic film review. And today we have a guest. Our guest is Tim. Hello, Tim.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been a film nut my whole life. You know, classic films. Orson Welles is one of my heroes. Laura's my favorite movie. I love that style. Any kind of movie. If it's black and white, I'm mostly going to watch it. So much to the point that my family knows if Audrey Hepburn's on TV, no one's talking to me because that's just how it's supposed to be. I write in my spare time.
Yeah.
I've published a couple screenplays, just published my first novel, Devil's Half Acre. It's doing really well, it's pleasant and people want a sequel. So that's always a plus. But yeah, I look forward to talking about the movie with you today.
And where can we find your book?
Everything's under Amazon.
Amazon. Okay.
Yep.
Devil's Half Acre.
Yep. Timothy Denman, and it'll be there. So
okay, check it out, everybody. It's what is the premise?
It's essentially where we grew up at. It tells the story of a piece of land that no one ever kind of knew who owned it or what it was about, called Devil's Half Acre. Yeah. So it tells my version of the backstory of what it's about, and it introduces my main character, Nev Richards, who's been in several, the screenplays and future books. So.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, check that out, folks. But today we are getting in our time machine, and we are going back to 1955, and we are going to talk about what film?
We're talking about Night of the Hunter.
Night of the Hunter. This is one of my favorites, and you mentioned in the beginning how you like black and white,
Absolutely.
So you must like this film.
I do.
Yes. So a couple things about this film. This is based on a novel by Davis Grubb, The Night of the Hunter. He actually got together with Charles Laughton. Charles Laughton is the director of this film. Yes. He got together with Charles Laughton, and apparently he would make some drawings, sort of drawing out the different scenes for him. And then they actually adapted it to screen. The screenwriter is James Agee. Is that how we say his name? James
That's
Agee?
What I added to being, James Agee. And they have Lawton listed, too, as a screenwriter.
Yeah, he did. Well, because apparently James Agee, he was from the South. He had experience in the Depression, but he put together a 293-page screenplay. So you can imagine how long that film would have been. Yeah. So Charles Laughton was forced to cut that down considerably. That's why he's also... I don't think he was given a credit, though, was he?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I think he said he wouldn't take a credit. Okay. From what I remember hearing is that he refused to take a credit for it. Anyhow, James Agee also was Oscar nominated for his work. He did the screenplay on The African Queen,
which
I thought was really interesting.
It's one of my favorite,
Yeah, another great. But I think one of the most important people in this particular crew, besides, of course, Charles Laughton, is cinematographer Stanley Cortez. Whoa. What he did with this film is amazing. And he shot The Magnificent Ambersons, obviously one of our Orson Welles films that we love. He was nominated for an Oscar for that as well. So art director Hildyard Brown, he was also instrumental in creating a lot of the scenes. The thing about this film is that it looks like it's shot on location, but it's not.
Right, yeah, I saw some of the exteriors were shot in Moundsville, like you see some of the other shots, but a lot of it I know was studio.
Yeah, almost everything was shot in the studio, but it's made to look, and again, this is a credit to the art director and to the cinematographer that you really believe you're on it really looks like you're on location.
Yeah, and there were some scenes that, I don't want to say it looked like German expressionism, but there was moments where it was surreal in the landscape.
You're absolutely right. That's what Charles Laughton intended. He was very interested in German expressionism. He was very interested in silent films. So there's a lot of places we can pinpoint out where he does that sort of thing. Another thing I thought interesting about Hildyard Brown was the scene where she's in the water, and we're going to get to the plot shortly, but the scene where she's in the water, they shot that in a tank. She wasn't in a river or anything. They actually had a tank full of water, and that wasn't Shelley Winters. That was a dummy with Shelley Winters with a face mask.
But it was amazing.
Well, the person that did the face mask, here you're going to like this one too, it was Maurice Siderman, makeup artist. He was also the makeup artist in Citizen Kane.
So it's Wells. It carries on from him.
Yeah, and I think it's possible too that Charles Laughton loved Citizen Kane, I would guess. If I seem to understand Charles Laughton and his tastes, I would guess he really liked Citizen Kane, and he particularly perhaps asked for these people.
Yeah, the one thing I saw where Cortez was saying that of all the people he worked with, that Laughton and Wells were the only two people that
understood lighting.
They understood lighting. So
yes.
You can see that scene you're talking about, that lighting. Yeah, it's eerie and beautiful at the same time.
And before I even say the music, Hildyard Brown, what I was getting back to is he actually supposedly went down into the water, into the tank, and he was shooting that scene inside the water. Okay. And then they also shot it as well from above.
Yeah.
But he was in the tank with her. They said he had I guess they called it an iron lung.
At that point, he had the big Scooby-Doo suit.
What is an iron lung? That makes it sound like he's on a ventilator or something. I was really confused. And Hildyard Brown is also an Oscar winner. He won an Oscar for his work in Cleopatra, so he designed all those amazing sets on Cleopatra. And speaking of the eeriness of that particular scene, the score, Walter Schumann, I thought really, really good.
Yeah, it was varied, throughout the pacing, and there was some, I don't want to say lighthearted.
He had themes.
Yeah.
He had character themes. I did think he was a little heavy-handed in some parts. The music is kind of like dun, 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 and it's like, okay, it can be dramatic without so over. That was a little much in some points.
There were times when they're walking into town, and it's almost like that. I don't say comical music. It seems like it would hook you in and be beating you down with the intensity, and then he would kind of pull that out. So it didn't necessarily disconnect you at points, but it was kind of like you could take a breather.
Yeah. Well, and then, like I said, there's different themes for different characters. There's a preacher theme, which is very, of course, ominous, I suppose. And then the different characters have different themes I'm going to talk about in a bit. The editor is Robert Golden on this film. The director, as we said, Charles Laughton, the first and only film directed, sadly.
Yeah, I did some research on that. From what I gathered, he preferred theater because he said once you did it in film, that was it. You couldn't adjust, couldn't move on the fly. And so you can see, I think, some of the theater aspects in it.
Yeah, and he had, sadly, this film had a terrible response, and I think it depressed him to the point that he didn't want to make any more films, which is really very sad because this film is very amazing.
Yeah, it's weird because doing the research, you'll read a review that hated it, and then you'll read a review that loved it.
Yeah.
And it's like split 50-50 down, and I know that it wasn't received great. Kind of like Citizen Kane when it first came out.
Citizen Kane.
And then years later, like, oh, this is amazing.
It's a very similar parallel if you think about it, because Citizen Kane, Orson Welles was an actor who had never directed a film before.
Right.
Now we have an actor, Charles Laughton, had also never directed a film. And it's interesting that Stanley Cortez would say they were the ones that understood light the best because they were the two ones that had never directed, were not directors.
But I think that fell with the theater background because I know Wells did a lot with the lighting and the shades, and they both had similar backgrounds in theater experience. So I think you can see.
Yeah, Charles Laughton was more of an established actor by the time he directed his film. So the novel and the film, they draw from a true story of Harry Powers, who was hanged in 1932 for the murder of 2 widows and 3 children in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And we do see, we're here in Pittsburgh, we kind of are knowledgeable. We do see the prison, which is a real prison, right?
Yes,
Moundsville, I believe.
The Moundsville State Penitentiary, This time of year gets a lot of visitors for it being haunted. And absolutely. So.
Yeah, not used anymore.
No.
But it's sort of a haunted
tourist
location,
attraction.
and people, it's scary and it's menacing. Right. Let's dive into the movie.
Absolutely.
The beginning, what do you think of those overhead shots? Because I feel like, what do you think of that?
I love the premise that it established. I would have done it a little different. It wasn't my favorite. Yeah, it wasn't my favorite shot of the movie, and that's kind of my issue with this movie. Sometimes there's things to me that I would have liked to seen him made it after he'd made a couple movies, and he would have been able to fine tune it. So I think that's sometimes where I don't want to call it avant-garde, cinema, but some of the shots like that, I love the concept of her reading the Bible verses and setting it up. It just kind of seemed a little off to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really love those overhead shots. To me, they just seem like a little shaky. They didn't seem very stable. And I mean, I'm sure they were flying over in something.
Right.
I imagine they were flying when they did it. But I just didn't care for the shakiness look on the camera. And that's just me. Maybe I'm just particular, but...
No. Wells always said, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what the point was of the overhead shot. I guess just to give us a basis of the area. I'm not...
Yeah, like an establishing shot
Yeah.
almost. Yeah.
So, but I mean, the first thing you kind of see is Robert Mitchum, who plays the main character. He's the preacher, Reverend Harry Powell. I mean, obviously, do we think he's a real reverend? Probably not.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
No,
I think he was a precursor to televangelist in this movie.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, he does do a lot of televangelist-like talk in this film. So he's driving along in his vehicle. Again, this is not shot on location. This is rear projection, I believe. They're putting as he's in the vehicle, they're putting the scenes of the driving by the river in the background. Again, though, very, very well done. It's pretty seamless.
I love him talking to God.
Yeah.
Because he's rationalizing what he does and why he does it. I'm a man of God. I listen to you. This is what you've told me to do. Those god-awful women, I have to take care of them. So I love him, the pretense that he's building that he's doing God's work.
Yeah, it's sort of establishing the character right off the bat really nicely. There's going to be so much symbolism throughout this film that as we go through, we're going to see. There's so many interesting things. So what we see is he's traveling. Well, I guess actually in the beginning, it's the children finding that sort of Wicked Witch of the East, Wicked Witch of the East type thing with the legs and I always think of that when I see that scene. I always think of the Wicked Witch of the East and her legs hanging out the house. But there's been a murder committed. I guess is what you're establishing.
Yeah.
Then you see him driving along. Then he winds up going to this girly show, I guess. And this is an interesting scene because you see the way they have the shadow in the scene, it looks like a keyhole.
Yes.
Like he's peering through a keyhole at this girl, just the way the light it has a keyhole cut out. I think that's sort of the point, that he's a voyeur, peeping Tom. And there's a lot of continuity in this film, a lot of parallels in this film where they'll keep showing the same thing over and over again to give you symbolism and continuity. Yeah. Whenever he seems to get aroused, the knife... Yeah, the knife in the pocket. Yeah. He has some sort of a switchblade in his pocket, and every time the switchblade will go out through the thing. So he's watching this girl, and that happens. And the police come in and grab him, and he's put under arrest. But first, he goes in front of this judge. And here's one of the parallels that is in the film. The way they set the court hearing with the judge and the back of his head, it's going to be exactly the same way when John's father has his court hearing.
Yes.
Done exactly the same. So you're drawing a parallel between the preacher and John's father, and it's going to do that in a couple scenes. So he's found guilty, and he's sentenced to whatever term, I can't remember offhand.
Yeah, I forget how many.
Yeah, some term. Some point in time. And then at the same time, you see this fellow driving up all crazy, and he comes upon these two kids. We find out this is the father of the two children.
Yeah, if there were one weak actor in the movie,
you think
Peter Graves, wasn't his best in this one.
Yeah, Peter Graves plays Ben Harper. Ben Harper is the character. This is the father of John Harper and Pearl Harper. Those are the two children. He comes up, he's freaking out. He's telling his son, you take this money and we're going to hide it, and you have to promise that you'll never tell anybody where it is, and you have to take care of your sister. So he gives him these two specific commands that this kid takes on board like absolute. He spends the film trying to follow these commands.
Yeah. And he did an amazing job of that.
Oh, this boy. Yeah, the boy that plays John, his name is Billy Chapin, and the girl Pearl is played by Sally Jane Bruce. Yeah, the boy is amazing. And this story is supposed to be told from the perspective of the boy. That's how Charles Laughton wanted this story told. So then this is going to be the second parallel scene with the father and the preacher. The police come to take the father to catch up with him, and it's going to be the exact same choreography, the exact same everything as later on in the film. So again, you have the parallel, the father and the preacher. Father, and technically, we'll see what comes to be the stepfather. So it's really interesting that he was so specific about getting that exactly right, exactly the same.
To get the connection. I did like that part.
What makes this so great is this sort of symbolism throughout. But also there's little bits of comedy in this film.
Yeah, and that sometimes for me that worked, and other times I would have liked to seen had Preminger directed it or Wells directed it, had they pulled us back, or would they have just hammered us through the whole movie?
Yeah.
So that aspect I would have liked to seen.
Well, one of the comical scenes comes up when they're in the jail.
Right, yeah.
And by coincidence, Ben winds up being in the same cell as the preacher. They're roommates or cellmates or whatever. And Ben also is talking in his sleep. And so the preacher is aware that there's money involved. And we've seen from the beginning that the preacher is all about trying to find money. That's his whole thing. Like his whole thing is preying on rich widows and taking their money. That seems to be his MO. So you see him put his head, they're in bunk beds, and you see him put his head down on the bunk looking at this guy as he's talking to sleep, trying to hear what he's saying. And all of a sudden he gets up and punches him.
Yeah, and I like that scene because it is funny and it makes
is
you
funny.
Giggle. But yeah, so it works there for whatever reason.
I know
But,
what you're going to say. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say doesn't work. But that's, I think it's more towards the end that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're
there's
gonna
one
say.
scene that, yes, if I could have cut it out, I would have completely cut it out.
I have a feeling I know what
We'll
you're going to
see.
say.
We'll see
But
when we get there.
we're getting there. We're getting there. So anyhow, the father does not tell him where the money
Right.
is. But the father winds up getting executed.
Yeah, and even that little scene where he stuffed
The
that
rag
in his mouth so he
won't
wouldn't talk. Yeah,
he won't talk in his sleep. He gets executed because we do find out that when he did this robbery, he killed some people, so he's executed. And then the kids singing the Hangman song.
You know what? Yeah, and anytime you have children singing, it's creepy. It's
Creepy.
not as creepy as a Nightmare on Elm Street creepy, but that adds to the
it
creepiness.
is creepy.
Yeah.
Well, I should say this is a creepy film. I mean, this
Yeah.
is technically a film noir. We're doing this in our horror series. This is technically a film noir, but it does have horror elements.
Yeah, and I think creepy is the most accurate word for it because, when we watched it, there were moments where you're like, it's got just an eerie feeling about it, and he managed to capture that so beautifully.
Yeah, and Robert Mitchum does a really good job of being frightening. I mean, he's chillingly frightening.
This
He's
is
terrifying.
almost a precursor to what he played in Cape Fear, just magnified it. So
Yep.
he's like, well, I'm going to take what I did here,
Yeah.
and there's just going to be nothing happy about it.
Yeah. The interesting thing about this is up till this point, Robert Mitchum was playing a lot of film noirs. This was kind of a bit of a different role for him. And I think it did a really good job of showing his versatility. And then later on in his career, he would be even more versatile. He did a lot of really against type roles, like in Ryan's Daughter, as one I think of, and The Sundowners, where he plays these more sympathetic type characters and not at all hard-edged or that sort of thing. So I think Robert Mitchum is a pretty good actor, a pretty good versatile actor.
I was watching last night someone talking about that, and they said what he did early on, had he been in our time period, what he'd done, they would have seen his brilliance of how he acted. He was more of a character than a method actor. And he doesn't get that recognition because of the time period that he was in.
And he was just in so many film noirs, so almost typecast to an extent in film noir.
Yeah, and I also just reviewing some of his movies, I'm like, he made a movie, I think, every year for like 75 years.
Well, that's what they got stuck into when they were back
doing
in
the
studio
serials. Yeah,
system.
it was
Like,
just
they
crazy.
just grinded those guys out. They didn't care. They're like, we're paying you such and such amount a week. We want you to put it. Yeah, I mean, it was terrible for the actors back then. But anyhow, the father's executed. Eventually, the preacher gets out of jail. Yes. We're not really sure what the time frame is.
Correct. Yeah, I don't want to say a couple years.
It's really unknown.
There's some parts that I wonder if, because he had to cut the screenplay, if he had to pick parts out that may have tied certain things together. And there's one part we'll talk about that, I guess, time passing, it didn't make sense. But
you're not really sure how much time has passed. But then you see a shot of this ice cream parlor, I guess, and Shelley Winters playing Willa Harper. This is the widow of Ben Harper, the mother of the children. And she's talking to these two characters that I think are the comic relief
they
in
are,
the film.
yeah.
Icy Spoon.
Yeah.
Her name is Icy Spoon, which is hilarious to begin with. I mean, what the heck? And then the husband's name is Walt Spoon, and they're sort of this typical married couple that argue and
they're
fight.
almost like Nels Olson and not Olson, but from Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, they're just
the
kind of
store
like
owners.
this couple, and she's very busybody and he's very like, oh, I don't know if you should do that, that sort of thing. And her voice is just very shrill.
I think we can all agree upon that.
It's very shrill.
Later on in the film, it gets real grating.
Yeah, I could live without her voice, to be honest. But anyhow, they show them all together in this sort of happy little scene, and then all of a sudden you cut to this train shot and this very menacing music, and you know that something bad is coming.
Yes.
And this is the arrival of a preacher on the scene of this town. And of course he is coming because he knows who the family is and he wants that money.
Absolutely.
So he winds up showing up, and right away he's doing his little preaching thing, and he's doing his love-hate hand thing and making his little story about Cain and Abel. And everybody seems to be buying into this guy except John. John is not fooled by him. John is very suspicious of him. He doesn't like him, and he knows something is wrong with him.
Absolutely. Now, I like the scene where you can see him shadowed his hat. I think that's the first time you see him. That's probably my favorite shot of the movie because it's a foretelling without a word being said, and it's just this creepy, creepy moment.
Yeah, the shadows used are so beautiful in this film. There's so many really gorgeous scenes and visual effects in this particular film. Again, even that train shot, I'm sure stock footage that they used, but it's just the way they cut into it was really nice. So he comes into town, and of course he winds up trying to hook up with the mother because she's a widow, and that's a specialty, right? And these townspeople are all for him. This stupid icy spoon lady is like promoting him.
Yeah, he plays a real good snake oil salesman, and the whole town just buys into it. And she's trying to, you need to go get this person, go. So
she's like, you need a father for those children, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you just want to say, stop it. No, she doesn't. This person's not good. But like I said, nobody can seem to see that except the boy. She says, I can't understand why John doesn't like the preacher. She doesn't understand why John doesn't like him. The little girl likes him. The little girl's real loving with him and cares about him, and he treats the little girl like she's his daughter. But eventually they wind up getting married, right?
Yeah.
And then all things start to get a little bad after that because they get married, and on their honeymoon night, she comes out in this not revealing nightgown at all. I mean, it's very unrevealing, to be honest. But he makes it very clear that, first of all, he kind of shames her. He's like, go look.
Lets her know what her job is.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not to pleasure him. It's to take care of those kids.
To beget. He says to beget children. But he shames her. He doesn't say she's acting like a slut or whatever, but he implies it, and she becomes very... Shelley Winters does a great job of going through all these different character emotions and character developments. And so she's, first of all, shamed, and then she's determined to be reborn or clean.
Right.
She says the word clean. Let me be clean for him.
That's the scene. It seems like it was compressed because you see him having that conversation, and then all of a sudden she's preaching hellfire and brimstone.
Yeah.
And I want to see what bridge they crossed to get there. To me, it seems immediate, and I think that may be, again, with him having to cut the script. Mm-hmm. So I would have liked to seen that development a little bit more.
Yeah, it is weird how they're in the room, they're doing this, and then boom, and she's... It's very weird.
She's Tipper Gore.
You have this little mob thing that is going to also continue throughout the film, these little mobs of people that they're preaching to, and they're like, yes, and they always seem to have these torches and stuff. It's very mob-like.
Yes.
And I said, this happens several times in the film. Yeah. She's completely fooled by him. She's on board completely with the Reverend. Again... Now he's starting to ask John, where's the money? Where's the money? And then when he realizes that John is going to tell, he starts working on the little girl. And meanwhile, John's trying to tell his mother, hey, he's asking about this money because he told the mother that the money was thrown in the river.
Yeah.
And that's not what he's interested in. And so she doesn't even believe her own son at this point. She believes him over her son. And so what eventually happens is, and I really like this scene actually, she's at the Spoon ice cream place, the icy Spoon Lady ice cream place. I just can't get over that name. But the thing I really like about this scene is that all of a sudden there's all this mist in the scene. There's just mist everywhere, and it's almost like a premonition. Something's happening, and she's like, oh, I got to run home, and I don't like him to be stuck with them for too long or whatever she said. She's worried about John and the preacher, and she has to babysit them. And so she comes back home, and as she's coming home, she overhears him harassing the little girl about where is the money, and then she realizes that he is doing this. I think he even yells at the little girl or does something, and she runs and hides in this closet. And when she walks in, she makes this kind of expression with her face, which is, I don't really know. It's a really interesting expression. It's like her mouth is smiling, but her eyes are kind of...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really interesting expression. I've really never seen that on anybody.
And he almost was the precursor for the horrible bad stepfather in every movie that post-dated that with either killed the mom or killed his first wife looking to become that. So
Yeah, he's definitely not a very nice fellow. I think at this point she recognizes that he is not who he says he is. And there's this really beautiful scene. This scene is just amazing. I think this is very German expressionist. This is even reminiscent of Dr. Caligari, this scene where
Absolutely.
she's lying in the bed and the way they have
angles are shot
lit,
and everything.
The way they have it lit with the shadows and the window, the light coming in from the window, and she's laying in bed like a sacrifice, isn't it? The way she has her arms crossed over her body like she's a human sacrifice, and she's lit like an angel almost.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It was almost like a tribute or a shout out or an Easter egg to Caligari.
Captain Don. It looks very much like Dr. Caligari. We just actually talked about that film a couple episodes ago, so it's right in my mind. But that's the first thing I thought of. And he does this really dramatic thing with the light coming in on him and for raising his fist, his hate fist.
Yes,
raising his hate fist, and I think it's obvious she knows that he's planning to kill her. And she's kind of accepted the martyrdom.
Yeah, it's almost like she knew before he did, and that's the moment where he's fighting with it. It's he's
fighting himself.
Yeah, Cain versus Abel. What am I going to do? Yeah.
And then he comes up with the knife, which he's holding in his love hand, not his hate hand, I might add. And then it does a dissolve that swipes left to right, just like if he were slashing her throat, which I thought was really interesting. And then the next thing you know, the kid wakes up, he hears a car, and again you have so much mist. It's very misty the whole time, and then after that you get that great shot of her in the water with her hair.
Yeah, because and then they wake up with the noise and there's like an explosion or a fire or something, and then you see the shot of her. Yeah,
and even in the shots in the water, they actually show the cut on her throat, which is kind of surprising to be done in that at
time
that point
frame,
in time. That
they would postcode.
They would let that go. Yeah, so anyhow, then he thinks he has it made. He makes up this excuse to the Spoon people that she's run away, and he's very not realistically crying, and he's not very believable. But for some reason, they believe him completely. He does not look believable. And I think it's not because he's doing a bad acting. I think he's deliberately acting like not believably.
Absolutely.
Like he's a sociopath. He's not really capable of crying for real, so he has to do this fake,
dramatic,
this fake crying. And they believe him, and he's like, well, I've got to take care of these children. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. Fine.
Yeah, this stranger, we've known you for 2 weeks, you're married, you're
no
going to take care of the kids.
problemo.
Yeah, take it, we don't care.
No problemo. Yeah, sure, no problem. They don't have any grandparents apparently at all, so I don't know where these people, they have no next of kin. But anyhow, so then, of course, John knows that they're in big trouble, and he and Pearl are hiding in the basement. And this basement scene is really cool too, because they made the set specifically small so that Robert Mitchum would look really big, the kids would look really small. And again, they lit that. I think they said they made it look like subterranean.
Yeah.
That was really cool as well.
And so that was the only shot I really didn't like, is when they do the iris there. It doesn't fit in. I know
but it's supposedly a shout out to D.W. Griffith.
Well, they said Cortez said that's the second time he had done that since the Magnificent Ambersons. So to me, it just seemed like it was out of nowhere, and it took me away from. That's probably the one shot I don't like. Yeah, it was just.
You mean
odd.
when he's like it's standing in front of the house,
and then all of a sudden you just see the.
They said that it was done because of D.W. Griffith, because Charles Lawton, before he shot this movie, watched D.W. Griffith movies incessantly because he was such a fan of D.W. Griffith, and he wanted to achieve the same kind of feel in the film, and that's another reason why he really wanted Lillian Gish.
Absolutely, yeah. It was United Artists that did this anyway, right?
What?
United Artists was the one who produced this one.
United, yes.
Yeah,
United,
okay.
yes, correct. And that's an interesting, also an interesting tie-in.
Yeah, so there's,
Yeah, because he used to be one of the heads of United Artists. Another thing I liked about the honeymoon scene, I'm sorry, I missed this when
That's
I was
okay.
talking about this, is that, what did you think of that just bare light bulb?
I like,
What was the symbolism behind that, I wonder?
I don't know. That's kind of what I liked about the movie is those moments like that.
Yeah.
And you don't really know what he sometimes was thinking, whether that was just the theater creative side and let's just run with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think you'd have like a chandelier or something, but
Yeah.
that bare light bulb to me must signify something barren, simplistic. I'm not really sure. I just something I thought of. Anyhow, the kids, they're in the basement. They get Mitchum to go down to the basement and then telling him that it was buried there. He doesn't believe them. And then he manages to knock a bunch of jars down onto his head and knock him out. And then you have another comical scene where he's trying to go up the stairs after them and he's falling down. Yeah. And they said a stuntman did the fall part. And then he's almost like Frankenstein going after them at the stairs. And they get in.
Yes, that scene was, so that's kind of where you get the mixture of it's intense, and then it's comical.
Comical, yeah.
So whether they're just pulling back.
So it's not too much for the viewer.
Yeah.
So they manage to trap him in the basement, so they get away, and they go to, and there's an Uncle Birdie that we haven't talked about. Yeah. He's this guy that lives down by the river in a shack by the river. Lives in a van down by the river. That's the first answer.
Yeah, it's a pretty good indication.
He lives in a shack down by the river. But anyhow, he's always fishing with John, and he told him earlier, if you ever need help, you come to me. So, of course, John immediately goes to him. However, he has seen that very day, he saw Shelley Winters or Willa's body in the lake. Somehow he could see clearly down the lake. Yeah. Very
I'm not
clear
call
water.
That one out.
Very clear water in this particular. Oh, it's a river even. Very clear water in this particular river.
And
that
he could see
all the way down
he could
into
see
the
the
river.
throat cut. Yeah.
Yeah, he could see the chair. Yeah, and he gets all distressed and he starts drinking heavily. So by the time John gets to him, he's so drunk he can't even get up. And so John realizes he has to do something himself. He takes Pearl and they go find the skiff that belonged to his father, which is kind of like a canoe or some sort of boat. But at the same time, there's a really cool scene too when they're trying to get in the skiff, and then Robert Mitchum is at the top again in shadow at the top of this hill, and it keeps cutting back to forth. That's another sort of D.W. Griffith technique that he was using.
That was what, from Birth of a Nation?
Yeah.
I know with the train scenes, the build.
It's the cross-cutting, I guess. Cross-cutting there. But that's done really, really nicely. And it, again, gives you that sort of anxiety, like, oh, get in the boat, get in the boat, get in the boat. And then once they get into the boat, it turns into a little bit different. There's a more fantasy sort of.
Yeah, surreal, yeah.
Yeah, a dream or fantasy-like feel to it as they're floating down the river on this boat. And you keep seeing all these animals. Yeah, there's a lot of animals on the side. Sort of, again, you feel like you're almost in a Disney movie in a way, but a very dark Disney movie.
Yeah, where in the note somewhere he said it was, I don't want to say Snow White, but one of the Disney movies, if it were crazy like that scene.
It's just the animals along the bank that you keep seeing, like just.
And then I like the parallels as they're traveling, he's traveling.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a lot of really beautiful scenes in the background as they're going down the river. They did it again. This was still done on a set, but you can't really tell. Although the stars do look a little unrealistic, to be honest. But there's a lot of beautiful scenes as they're going down the river. And again, the animals, they show a lot of prey type animals, which I think are more reflective of helpless creatures like the children. I think that's sort of the symbolism there. And there's one scene that I particularly like. I don't know how you think about this scene, but when they come up to that sort of farmhouse, and it's so beautifully shot there. You know what I mean?
Well, even that house in the farmhouse kind of had that German expressionism.
Yes, very.
Frame to it because it was narrow
very
and
much
awkward.
so.
Yeah.
When they first arrive, first of all, the waters are real tranquil. The light is behind the houses. There's a good amount of light behind the houses. It's just such a pretty scene. And then they get up into this loft. There's, again, cows and stuff. There's a lot of animals. They're in this loft, and then they have that view out the window that's also really beautiful. But then what do they see? They come, all of a sudden they look out the window, and this song that he sings, oh my God.
And that is creepy. It
Creepy.
adds to it. And I think he did a real good job of pacing up to them traveling parallel.
Yeah.
Because there's that sense of dread when they stop at that house. Because you're like, nah, this is where he gets them. He's going to show up here.
Yeah, he's everywhere. We can't get away from him. He's always singing that song. It's almost like an intimidation thing.
Yeah.
leaning. It's awful.
And then here in my mind, I'm going, okay, if I knew he was there, I would let him pass, and I would be going the opposite
Yeah.
direction. I wouldn't continue
Well, I
the
don't.
same
I
way
think
he's
the thing
going.
is that they can't go upriver. They can only
Right,
go
but
down.
in my mind, I'm going, no, I've been walking, hitchhiking, whatever I had to do.
I love how he says, does he ever sleep? That's a really funny part too.
Yeah.
And then they figure they better run away, they better keep going. And you'll notice it shoots the same scene as before, but now the river's choppy
Yes.
and now it's all dark.
Yeah, the water
So it's
is-
like the menace has come
Yeah.
and now it
The storm is brewing.
Yes, storm, exactly. And so they keep going down the river, and eventually they come up to, and they run into Lily and Gish. But before they get to Lily and Gish, they show all these stars, which I guess we failed to mention in the beginning. There's a bunch of stars in Lily and Gish's face and all these children's faces around. So I think the whole star thing, which is almost exactly the same as the beginning, is sort of saying this is Lily and Gish, foreshadowing that she's coming. And then you see these clouds with the sun coming down on them as if heaven or light or goodness. And I feel like they're symbolizing here's your safety, and it's Lily
Even
and
though
Gish.
he's dark and he's using God's
She's
word
light.
to spread evil.
Yes.
I've always been fascinated by that too, that walk that they use the word of God to do evil, because then we're like mindless sheep and we buy into it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, she comes in as that light, or the
Yes.
shepherd, so to say.
Right.
And you'll see that later on, because she's, I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
You're not a man of God.
Yeah, she's
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Lily and Gish is awesome in general.
Yeah, we
but
could
her
talk
character,
hours, yeah.
Her character is awesome in this film, but she clearly represents good. He clearly represents evil. That's very obvious in the film. But also she represents a mother goose. Do you see the way the children follow her?
Yes.
Like little geese. And as a matter of fact, in the very beginning when she first brings the children in, there are geese walking along. So it's just so much symbolism. And she's sort of this lady that picks up these stray kids. There's a whole theme here about
That's an accurate description.
Yeah.
She just picks up stray
yeah.
kids.
Well,
no
there's a sort of
questions
theme
asked.
along here about kids in the Depression era that
Yeah.
apparently lost their parents. They're on the road or they're going around begging. There's another scene where they're going to this lady's house and she's passing out potatoes. That's all she has for these kids. These kids traveling down the river that are homeless, orphans or whatever, trying to get food. So she just sort of takes these kids in and they come there. She takes them in. There's an older girl there named Ruby. She's about a teenager, maybe. I think there's a really significant part when she goes into the city with the like real neon signs, as if you're seeing this young, innocent girl and then this corruption like of the city with the signs, the neon. And then who does she meet?
Well, and also to me, it almost shows that she's playing the good and the dark too, because I'm going here to take these lessons, but she's going there
To meet boys.
for the boys and,
Yeah.
and to do the unspoken.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but she's still at this point an innocent person. But you can see she's being corrupted or possibly could be corrupted or she's about to be corrupted. And then she meets the preacher who, again, it's like he has GPS on these kids. Like, how does he hone in on them?
There's some plot points you just have to
it's just-
suspend belief and just roll with it. So,
I guess we forgot to mention that he's running around the country on a horse. He's got this horse. He's sort of...
yeah, I don't know if he stole that from somebody at that
No, they did
campsite.
say he stole it because remember they said the gypsies
Okay.
killed a man and stole his horse,
Okay.
and they think it was the Spoon people said
Right,
that. They thought it was
exactly,
the gypsies, and then the next thing we
Okay,
see
yeah,
is him on the
absolutely.
horse, and
Yeah.
we're like, okay, well, it was him.
And if you look back, the river wasn't really a river that they were traveling on. So there was kind of a stream that paralleled the river.
Yeah, so he just kept going. He
Yeah.
just went along the river, and he figured he'd run into them. So he gets this Ruby to tell them basically where they are, and then of course he shows up there, and he's trying to pretend like he's their father. And again, Pearl, when she first sees him, that sort of Frankenstein walk, like brainwashed
Yeah.
almost, you get. Like she drops the doll and she's walking to him in that sort of Frankenstein to his master type walk. I think that's, again, significant, like she's brainwashed.
Yeah.
But of course, John is like, no, that's not my father. And Lillian Gish is going, what's wrong? Lillian Gish is not called Lillian Gish in the film. She's
No,
called
it's
Rachel Cooper.
Rachel Cooper,
Yeah,
yeah.
Rachel Cooper. She's like, what's wrong, John? And he's not saying anything. He doesn't say a lot sometimes. And finally she says something like, go with your father or do something with your father. And he said, he's not my father.
And then she goes,
and he ain't no preacher neither. And I just love that part. And he dives under the porch and Robert Mitchum Reverend Powell chases him under and is trying to grab him. She comes out and she's got this shotgun and she's poking him in the back with the shotgun. He looks up and she's got this shotgun and he runs away. He's like, I'll be back.
Yeah. Well,
And then there's that really beautiful scene where she's sitting on the porch and he's in shadow and he's singing that song.
Yeah, and that's just creepy.
This is a great scene. He's singing that horrible song that's so frightening. And then she actually starts singing the song too, except she adds the word Jesus that he doesn't saying before. But it's almost like he uses that song to be intimidating and frightening, and she's saying, I'm not intimidated by you.
yeah, and her strength of that. I attached to her because that reminded me a lot of my grandma. So there was that personal connection because she had 13 grandkids that she would have at any time. And on her farm, she had shot at people who'd showed up. So that was the connection. We were all huddled behind her because she would have fought a bull.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to see her that pillar of
Very
strength
similar.
as elderly, it was an awesome scene to see that she was like, man, I don't care who you are. These are my kids. You're going to have to come through
Right.
me.
And she's sitting in the rocking chair with a shotgun across her lap, basically, singing this very religious song with him, in harmony with him. And then Ruby comes up, turns on the candle, which makes this beautiful light on this patio shade or whatever they have there, a screen or something. And then he escapes and she realizes that he's out there. And there's another part before that where a lot of times when they're showing the preacher, they'll show an owl after him. There's one point when he's traveling along and he does another one of those mob scenes where he's preaching to this bunch of people out of the blue that are just sitting around on the road, I guess. And after that, they show an owl. And then after, whether it's the first time when he's at the house or whatever time it is, they show this owl and then they show this rabbit, and you get the impression that, the way Rabbit screams, that the owl came and got the rabbit. And she says something along the lines of, it's a hard world for little things. And I think that's symbolic of predator and prey. Preacher is the predator, the prey is the children.
Yes.
And I have a feeling the scene that you don't particularly like is when he's in the house and he steps on the cat and he pokes his head up and she shoots him.
You nailed that, right?
I had a feeling you didn't like that.
It's just so out of character
It's very-
for him.
yeah,
Comical. Almost
yeah.
Keystone Cop, almost Laurel and
Because he
Hardy.
looks very comical in the scene.
And then the way he was yelling and screaming as he ran from the house.
Yeah, you know what? But I feel like, is that also the parallel to the owl? Because he almost sounds like an owl
Yeah, it just...
howling.
It could be, but to me, it just was one of those, it broke the fourth wall for me. Because I completely disconnected on that scene. And
Yeah.
I seemed to him to be like, okay, you shot me, now it's more menacing. I'm coming back after you. You've hurt me. I hurt you. But it's almost like he gave up and cowered into the barn.
And I think it also shows that he's a coward at heart. You'll notice the only people he's bullying really are children.
Right. And that may be that
And women.
Once he met that, here's this old crazy lady who's like, yeah, I'm not afraid of you.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going to do. And I think he called her bluff. But just, that scene was just odd for me.
Yeah. Even she says when she calls the police, I have this thing.
Yes.
This thing caught in my barn, as if he's an animal again. He's not a human being. And they come, and it's again the same. This is where the parallel comes in with the father. The way they arrest him is the exact same as when the father was arrested, to the T, exactly the same, everything. So you have that second symbolism. And then try not to spoil. You're going to have a mob thing again, another mob thing. And I feel like it could have ended there.
Yes.
I don't think I would have put those last couple scenes in.
To jump back a little bit, when the boy, what he does with the money, that's...
we never even said.
Yeah, that's the release. That's you gave me this thing that's too big for me. How dare you?
Yeah,
I don't
because
want it
when
anymore.
Robert, when the preacher is arrested, just like the father, it drives this kid back to like the traumatic flashback of the father, and he thinks he's back with the father, and all along this money has been hidden in a doll.
Right.
And we never mentioned that, of course. But all along this money has been hidden in a doll, and it is shown that in the film. But that's not like a cliffhanger thing. Right. They show you that it's hidden in the doll. But at the end, he does. He starts beating the preacher with the doll, saying, take it, I don't want it, it's not worth it. And you're right about that. This kid has been so traumatized.
Yeah. Again, that was, too big for me. And you see Lillian Gish, I call her, I'm sorry, that's what she is, Lillian Gish. But you see her reaction to him kind of nurturing, because she knows he's carrying a heavy burden.
Yeah.
And of all the people in the house, she's kind of sweet on him when she was like, well, tell me that story again. And she takes the
Well, and the symbolism with the apple.
Yeah.
Him giving her the apple twice. He does a lot of things where he repeats it to keep some sort of continuity. I don't know if it was an apple because remember back in day, like you would give an apple to a teacher. Is that what that meant? Or I'm not really sure. That's the beauty of this particular film is that you can draw your own conclusions. I like films where they give you symbolism and you can make your own.
But yeah, I agree with you when you flash to the mob scene. Take Icy Spoon out of it. just leave it at that scene. Leave it to your imagination.
Yeah. And basically there's more stuff that happens in the film we're not going to spoil, but there's not much to spoil in this particular film. But a great film. What are your thoughts on anything?
It was weird because, like I said, it has all these jumbled parts and pieces that I sometimes don't like, but it just works wonderfully. Yeah. And to me, we'll call her Rachel Cooper this time, but Lillian Gish to me is my favorite part of the whole movie.
Yeah.
You know, Mitchum, I like that he showed you that hint of darkness. I love they managed to keep it creepy.
Yeah.
I was having more fun reading some of the behind the scenes stuff where they said Mitchum said that was his favorite director. He would never work with anybody else.
Yeah.
But then they said, well, he showed up drunk and him and Lawton didn't get along.
He didn't get along with the producer.
Yeah.
The producer was Paul Gregory. He absolutely hated the producer. They said he actually urinated on his car.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah. Yeah. You know, then I heard that he directed the kids because Lawton didn't like working with the kids.
Lawton didn't like the girl.
Yeah. Well,
he didn't like the little girl. He liked the boy.
That's kind of where children and pets, but
yeah.
The little boy did good, but that may have been too heavy.
Yeah, it's hard for the girl. And they said the girl wasn't really even an actress.
Yeah.
The boy was an actor.
She looked like an Olsen twin from the early Full House days.
Yeah. I mean, but as far as the acting in the film, amazing job by Shelley Winters, amazing job by Lillian Gish, amazing job by the boy, Billy Chapman, and a really amazing job by Robert Mitchum. I mean, the acting in this film is really good. We don't particularly like Evelyn Varden, but you know, it's not that her acting was bad. She was probably playing the
character
annoying, meddlesome role that she was supposed to play, but it just.
Yeah, and I think for us too, because like we talked about earlier, you see the ties between Griffith, you see Pickford with United Artists tied in with her relationship with Lillian Gish. You see the, people who work with Orson Welles. So for us, we kind of have, it's almost like a stepchild from our favorite people.
And we have a rating we do on this show. We do 1 to 5 rating, obviously 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. And so what is your star rating for this film?
I would go with 4. The only reason I wouldn't go with 5 is just my personal, some of those technical, the shots, more of the establishing shots, and like I said, some of the choppy time sequences that we don't get to. I would have liked to seen that developed more.
Yeah.
But it's a much-watched movie for everybody. You have to.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a precedent set, so I hope you're excited that you're here for this precedent because I have never given a film a 5, and I'm giving this film a 5.
Awesome.
I love this film. This film is phenomenal. I love the German expressionist look to it. I love the cinematography more than anything in this film. This cinematography is gorgeous. I wish it could have been shot on location.
You're right.
But the budget, again, we have a very low budget. There's really not much they could do about it. But, just so many absolutely beautiful shots. All the credit to Stanley Cortez. I mean, just absolute gorgeous cinematography in this film. And amazing job by Charles Laughton in his first film. Like I said, very reminiscent of what Orson Welles did at Citizen Kane in his first film. Just amazing job. I love this film.
Okay, so now have you reviewed Laura yet? Because I have to ask you about that.
Which?
Laura?
No.
Okay.
But we did review Citizen Kane.
I was going to say, well, you didn't give that a 5?
I didn't give Citizen Kane a 5.
Wow. Well, in fairness, it's not my favorite Orson Welles
It's not my
movie.
favorite Orson Welles either.
We've talked about that.
Yeah.
But to me, it's the standard going forward by which all films are made. Every movie's going to have an element of that in it.
Right.
So it almost needs to be taken out of a category.
I found that sometimes the story is a little laggy in Citizen Kane. I think that's the fault of the film.
Oh yeah, I consider it a film, not a movie, because it's technical. It's beautifully.
Yes, I gave it a 5 for cinematography. If
Okay,
it makes
there
you
we
feel
go.
any-
That works. It does. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the cinematography, but when I do my ratings, I judge on all aspects of film, and I just felt the story fell a little short.
Well, and I even think, not to jump too much, but with The Stranger, if you've seen that with Orson Welles,
I haven't.
He's kind of living that double life too. He's a charmer, so you kind of see some of the elements, a little bit of this into that, and so.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, maybe we will someday review that film.
Yeah.
You can come back when we do another Orson
absolutely.
Welles film. But thank you again. I
Oh,
really
no,
appreciate.
it's been a blast. So, yeah.
Thank you for being our guest, Tim. I really appreciate your insights on this film. And for our Silver Screen Time Machine or Silver Scream Time Machine, we are down to our second to last horror film. Our next is going to be a big, exciting one. You have to join us for this. We are going to have Russ Streiner on the show from Night of the Living Dead, the original producer of the film, and also played Johnny. We're very excited to talk about Night of the Living Dead as our final horror film of this spooky season. So please stay tuned for that. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and to also follow our podcast, Silver Screen Time Machine. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Silver Screen Time Machine.
Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a comment and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Intro music composed by Heidi Engel.
Outro music composed by Maximus Monk.
Artwork by Tyler Birch.
Produced and edited by Wendy Wittick and Kirk Kolkowski.
Recorded at PCTV Studios in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.